Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. We're sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. Today, we're discussing the Marvel character Doreen Green, also known as Squirrel Girl. If you're not familiar with Squirrel Girl, sit back and be prepared to be introduced to a really cool character. According to the wiki entry on Comic Vine, Squirrel Girl first appeared in Marvel Superheroes number 8 in a story called The Coming of Squirrel Girl, in which Iron Man was actually a co-star. Her powers include agility, animal control, claws, gadgets, healing, super sight, super smell, super strength, unarmed combat, and clinging to walls. So with that little introduction, I'll start by asking our panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little about their interest in Doreen. And Jenny, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Jenny Swartz-Levine from Lake Erie College, where I'm an English professor and also Dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And I love Squirrel Girl. I picked up the comic back when in 2015 with the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and loved it so much at that point because it was just a lot of fun that I went back and found all of the other stuff and sort of those initial appearances. And I've got figures, I've got posters, and I really love Squirrel Girl because she's so positive and kind and solves her problems through the power of friendship. And it's a lot of fun. So I'm glad we're talking about Squirrel Girl today.
Okay, Ed.
Hello, my name is Edward Blaylock. I am a teacher at a much less prestigious level. I'm actually a middle school teacher. And I am one half of the podcast, A Geek History of Time, with my partner, Damian Harmony, who has done the work of putting our logo up as his background. And my love for Squirrel Girl is based in the fact that I was reading comic books as a nerdy teenager back in the 1990s, and she was such a breath of fresh air from everything else that was going on in comics at the time, because that was what some folks refer to as the Bronze Age of comics, where everything was getting gritty and everything was getting extreme and everybody was just angry and unhappy, and then along came Doreen and it was just fun again. And so yeah, that's my attraction to her.
Okay, Damian.
Yeah, I'm Damian Harmony. I'm a Latin teacher, a drama teacher, a history teacher at the high school level, the lesser half of our podcast to Ed Blaylock. And we've been doing that for, I think, 3 years. I think we have over 150 episodes up now. And our episode 122 was specifically on Squirrel Girl because I'm a big believer in lists. And I have a list of my top 5 favorite superheroes, and Squirrel Girl has always been in the top 5. I preferred growing up. I read the New Warriors. They were a big thing for me. So Nova was, my generation's Peter Parker. He was much more average and therefore more relatable for me. And then Speedball, and then there were a few others, and Squirrel Girl was just always in there because she was completely against type. Like you said, she solves things through the power of friendship. She's probably the most punk rock superhero to come out of that generation. And the fact that she has on her wins and loss records, again, I like lists, everyone she has defeated. And it has been verified by the watcher that she has in fact defeated everyone through the power of squirrels. But I think what really cinched it for me was during the Secret Avengers run. She was the babysitter for baby Danielle, and she had to audition by fighting Wolverine.
Yes.
And he's Wolverine, right? So he's the best at what he does. And he even tells her, like, she knocks him out at one point. She's like, yeah, Great Lakes Avengers represent, which is its own funny. And then he's like, and he grabs her, he's like, never turn your back to an enemy, you just lost. And she's like, are you sure? And it pans out, and there's just an army of squirrels ready to attack him. And I'm like, even he recognizes, like, if you go with the green deck of magic, you could win with just the power of squirrels. So that cinched it for me. That kept her forever in my top 3. And yeah, that's how I came to it. Now I have kids, my son and my daughter, and I make sure to model for them that Squirrel Girl is the most badass. We have that same figurine that I see down there. on my mantle, right underneath a big old picture of Boba Fett. So she has a special place in my house and in my heart.
Okay, Bishop.
Bishop O'Connell. I am an urban fantasy author, and I got into Squirrel Girl a little bit later. Ed and I actually pretty much grew up together. We met in the 7th grade, so we shared a lot of the same interests. And I remember picking up bits and pieces of Squirrel Girl when I was younger and thinking it was cool, but I really got into her when I sort of got myself into a better, healthy headspace in my later years, and could really appreciate her. And it's like everybody else mentioned. I mean, the act that she has kicked people's ass, but she doesn't have to. That it's not just friendship, but she also outsmarts and outmaneuvers. She outthinks. It is, that if she has to, she can throw down, but she doesn't like to. That she's more about making friends and keeping friends, and that there's always a way that even if there's somebody that technically just by stats and numbers should beat her, doesn't, because she can outthink them and she can get one over on them. It's and like Ed said, she was such a nice break from the comic books that I was into when I was a kid, because Wolverine was probably one of my favorite comics when I was a kid, and you don't get much darker and grittier than Wolverine, especially during the 90s. And I liked it because it appealed to that hormonal teenage boy inside me. But as I started to get older and understand the world and how things should be, and what kind of world would be a good world to live in, that's the kind of person that I want in that world. And she's just awesome, just undiluted awesome.
Okay, and Squirrel Girl is new to me, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot from the panelists today. And Damian and Bishop have kind of already spoken to this, but I'd be interested to know when you first discovered the character, and did you become a fan right away, or did it take a little while? Damian, do you want to add anything to your earlier answer?
Yeah, I think me being a dad and knowing that my kids were going to become literate, and knowing that I could shape what they were literate in, really helped hone my focus as to what characters I wanted to model for them were awesome. Having posters of Wolverine up didn't make much sense. I want my children to remain soft in a hard world, and Squirrel Girl is all that. The other nice thing is Squirrel Girl has a realistic body and a realistic outfit. Both of so squirrel stuff aside, which is just hilarious, but she's not this that famous cover that got all the flack of Spider-Woman body. She's not ridiculous spandex that somehow lifts, separates, and lets have the right kind of volume and density for teenage boys. Squirrel Girl, she wears a vest, she wears tights under her shorts, which I used to do, and she's just really cool. So I think coming at Squirrel Girl as an adult, kind of like what Bishop said, from a healthier headspace, I think that really helped. And I'd always had an affinity for teenage superheroes. I mean, I think all of us have. I mean, Spider-Man, start with that, but I've always had an affinity for those kinds of superheroes, because as they're discovering their powers, we're discovering their character, and I really like that parallel growth. And like he said, she could fight you. She absolutely could. And as a classicist, I absolutely love that in a character, because that's one of my favorite aspects of Aeneas, where he basically is equal in two minds, both for war and for peace, which is basically, I could fight you right now. I mean, if you want to do that, let's fight. That's fine. I'll win, and that's fine. But I'd rather just start by being friends. Can we do that? And I love that approach.
Okay. Ed, did you want to add anything to what you said earlier?
Well, I mean, about the only thing that I would add to it is just kind of a little bit of a survey of what the comic book landscape looked like at the time that Squirrel Girl appeared. As I mentioned, everybody was carrying guns. This was I want to say it was around the same time that cable became a big deal,
Mhm.
and other characters showing up in X-Men comics who were, hyper violent, gun toting kind of characters. This is where Rob Liefeld really became big. So nobody had any feet. Um, and just ammo pouches everywhere, and I want to bounce back to what Damian said about a realistic body type.
Mhm.
So many of the heroes that we saw show up during that time period were grotesqueries in terms of their absolute, like, hyper grotesque masculinity. With it wasn't just anymore a Superman kind of heavily muscular body type. It was this, like, roided out kind of every single striation of muscle in somebody's pecs had to be drawn in
Mhm.
excruciating, almost homoerotic kind of detail. And it was just it was tiring. It was exhausting to read after a while, even for me as a 15, 16-year-old boy. Being a short, unathletic kid, I looked at all that and I was like, well, I'm never gonna look like that. And so having somebody come along and just say, you know what, we don't have to take this so seriously. Like,
They'd also killed Jason Todd shortly around the time that she came out.
that's true. On
They'd
the DC
also
side, that is around the
fractured
same time.
they'd also fractured the psyche of like half the heroes at that point.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
It was
the 80s was
grim.
a terrible time, and then into the 90s in terms of like people's mental health.
Mhm.
And that was all in zeitgeist. And then you had somebody who was relentlessly positive.
Yeah, and not just positive, but like cheerful.
Mhm.
Like I think the important part of it is it's to me anyway, on an emotional level, it wasn't just positivity and pluck, but it was cheerfulness. There was joy and fun involved in it.
Mhm.
And then as I got older, the extent to which her very existence as a character made hardcore fanboys just like rage quit, and just made a certain sector of fandom just like insanely angry, was kind of icing on the cake for me, because I'm a little bit that guy. But I think just the degree of separation in tone from her and everything else was really important. It wasn't just that she was a plucky positive character, because I mean, Spider-Man was going through some ugliness at that time, but he still remained the plucky underdog, never give up, always keep fighting, kind of hopeful character that he's always been. Superman never stopped being Superman, but they weren't allowed to have fun.
Yeah, Daredevil had
You know.
stopped being swashbuckly by this point.
Yeah,
He'd
oh,
become
yeah.
Catholic grief boy.
But let's not get off track. Let's let
Oh,
everybody
sorry.
answer the question and then
Yeah.
come around.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
okay. Bishop?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much what's been hammered home, and it was the cheerfulness wasn't Pollyanna. It wasn't saccharine. It wasn't it. It's so many things at that time. I mean, that's where you had Deadpool started coming, so you had the idea of parodies becoming a parody of themselves, right? And you had oh god, what's his name, the interstellar bounty hunter on the motorcycle that's like the really bad parody.
Lobo.
Thank you. Yeah, you had a parody that ends up becoming a parody of a parody of a parody of itself, right? I mean, it got so deep. And Squirrel Girl was just sincerely good and happy and joyful. She was a hero. Other heroes you would want to be like, or they would be for adventures. Squirrel Girl was somebody you'd want to hang out with. She would just be fun just to do anything with. And that she would just be really nice to you and welcoming you, and she would just be really excited to get to meet you. And it was that. I mean, the only thing that was even close, I think, was Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler. He was always kind of upbeat and happy like that, but he never, to me, his, obviously because of the fact that he looked like a blue devil, was always draped in a little bit of sadness and ennui. Squirrel Girl, despite the fact that she had a 4-foot long prehensile tail, that, you know, she would tuck into her pants to be, was it her obviously awesome booty is how she would write it off everybody who saw it. You know, she never let any of that get her down. You know, the fact that she had gigantic buck teeth, you know, and how many kids can relate to having gigantic buck teeth at some point in their life, right? It was, she was relatable, but none of it felt forced or insincere. It was, I mean, and that's what hooked me right away. And I mean, I think people, when it first came out, a lot of people thought that it was supposed to be a parody, or it was supposed to be like, haha, making fun. Isn't this humorous? And a couple of the comic runs, I think, did do that. But you can't do that to her. Even when you're trying to do that intentionally, it doesn't work on her, because she isn't somebody that can be parodied because of her sincerity, if that makes sense. And to me, that's what hooked me about her right away.
Okay, Jenny, what about you?
One of the things that I love, particularly in sort of the most recent, Ryan North, Erica Henderson run, is what a role model she is for little girls. Some of my friends that have kids, I've given them the Squirrel Girl comic, and the girls have just adored it, because they're computer science majors, which is not necessarily a field that you see heavily dominated by women. I love also how, sort of coming at it from sort of an English major perspective, there's the way that text gets used in the comic itself. There's always opening up about how there's either Twitter posts or Facebook posts or text between her and usually Tony Stark. And then there's all these footnotes in there. So it's kind of a fun running gag that, that there's always a footnote in the text that you can read, but they're very informational and informative. So if you want to know more about, if they make reference to something with something happening in one of the computer science classes, oftentimes there's a footnote about Ada Lovelace, or Hedy Lamarr, or, other women that have been very important in science and things that led to computer science. So it's just joyous, and it is teaching everyone, but particularly little girls, that the options are limitless for anything that they might want to do. And you can get there through positivity and pluck. That word's come up a couple of times, and the power of friendship and working together. And it's just fun. So.
I was interested in what you all were saying about the costuming, because one of my pet peeves is what one of the people I follow on Twitter refers to as the boob sock, because even spandex does not do that. It
Right.
just doesn't. And
What
so
about bath towels, right? Even bath towels somehow are form-fitting in comic books for female characters.
yeah, and then there's the stance where the female character sticks out both her chest and her rear end. And you show me somebody who stands like that, like ever.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Squirrel Girl does not play to that. But it kind of leads into my next question, which is that even before the Marvel Comics universe movies, cinematic universe, catapulted Iron Man off the B list and into being a major character, he had his own book. He was a member of the Avengers, and he's appeared in about 10,000 issues of various comic books. Squirrel Girl, in contrast, has appeared in 455, according to the wiki on Comic Spine. Why do you think she hasn't gained a wider following? Ed, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think part of it is that until the MCU kind of made comic books more mainstream, there was a kind of a niche audience for the medium for a while. During my adolescence and Bishop's and Damian's, even though he likes to claim he's that much younger than we are, and I don't want to presume anything about anybody else's age relative to ours, but I know that during our adolescence, reading comic books was something that was done primarily by a particular kind of kid, and a character like Squirrel Girl wasn't something that was going to appeal necessarily to that kid, because that kid wanted the power fantasy of, the majority audience that they were trying to sell comic books to wanted the power fantasy of a Wolverine, or if you wanted to somehow combine that with being the class clown, you wanted to be Deadpool, or whoever, name whatever, character out of that era or before. And I think it has been a real benefit to the genre that there is now a wider audience who is consuming the medium. And so that representation now has somebody who that twigs with, like you were saying earlier about, like Jenny was saying earlier about, female students and friends' daughters. They would not have been encouraged to be reading any kind of comic books back when Squirrel Girl was first created, in any kind of numbers. Now they are there. And now they have this character to see themselves in. And so I think we're going to see her do much bigger and better things as the audience grows and changes and becomes more inclusive as part of wider culture. Kind of the argument I'm trying to make.
Okay, Bishop.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of, I would say, to put a finer point on something Ed said, I don't think it was just that it didn't appeal to comic kids. I don't think comic fans at the time, we felt like we were allowed for it to appeal to us, because that was it was okay to like girl superheroes, but they had to be like Dazzler or Rogue, or the toughies. They were either like rock stars and models, or they were just hard-hitting badasses. You couldn't like somebody that wasn't like that. And I mean, it was self-gatekeeping back then. I mean, it's, well, we all remember, I mean, in the 90s, not like things are entirely different now, but it was much more overt then that, feminine bad, girl bad, there's, still horror stories about gatekeeping that happens when women walk into comic stores, which I'm sure, Nancy, you and Jenny have never encountered ever before in your life. But it's kind of like, even when Harley Quinn came out, I think if you were a teenage boy that went in and wanted a Harley Quinn comic book when those first came out, the premise would have been that you were getting it for like some kind of an erotic sense, that you got it to get your jollies, not because you like the character, and you weren't really allowed for it. I think part of the other reason is, I think it's a niche. I think Marvel has kind of done a disservice with how they've promoted her. I think they could have done better getting the word out for her. And I think they're doing better. I mean, she's got some animated stuff out there that is excellent. Was it the Secret Warriors? The
Young Avengers?
Marvel. Yeah, the one, it's on Disney Plus. It's Marvel, is it Marvel Rising?
Yeah.
Excellent. And I won't try to butcher her name. I'll just say Lily from the AT&T commercials voices her, and was actually going to portray her in a live action New Avengers that got shot down. And I also think, obviously, with somebody like Iron Man, it's the benefit of time too. I mean, Iron Man was originally invented in the early 60s, right? So I mean, he's got 30 years on her, which is a bit of an advantage. But yeah, I think it's also that up until recently, boys may not have felt like they were allowed to like a character like Squirrel Girl. And I think it's Marvel not really doing everything it could to get word out about her. That I have met very few people that dislike Squirrel Girl, that have heard of her or know anything about her, that aren't also raging jackholes in other areas of fandom, that aren't the ones that got mad at the idea of Squirrel Girl rather than knowing anything about her. I think if she gets more airplay, she gets more screen time, I am hoping and praying, I know it's incredibly unlikely, but I'm hoping and praying that she shows up in Miss Marvel, the Disney Plus series that comes out, because her and Miss Marvel are famously really good friends. I really want her to show up in that, even though I know it's probably not going to happen. I think that would be a great way to get her out to the wider world. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what it was, is society just didn't allow us to like somebody like Squirrel Girl. It's
Okay, Jenny?
I think in some ways, which I think both Bishop and Ed have kind of gotten at, she pushes against type. Especially if you look at sort of the way that women were, female characters were drawn, then there was a lot of, cleavage and, high leg, cutouts on the costumes, leaving very little to the imagination. So the fact that she is more modestly clad, and it very much pushes against type and pushes against expectation. I also think it's got a lot to do with where she was appearing, because I mean, that first appearance, I mean, it was like the third story, and it's not like she's on the cover, she doesn't feature in the first story. And then when she got used again, it was Great Lakes Avengers with Dan Slott, and which was a fun title. It was an enjoyable, thing, but it wasn't sort of like one of the main books. So I think that in some ways it's the fact that she pushes against type and pushes against expectations, but then also she's appearing in a lot of the titles that were perhaps not front and center on the racks as you walked into the comic book store.
Okay, Damian?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that are going on there as far as the Iron Man to Squirrel Girl comparison. First of all, Iron Man is very much the male fantasy from the 60s. He's very rich. He's very powerful by virtue of his wealth. He's essentially Batman with alcoholism, but the fun kind. So you've got that going on. So you're already building on a type that has been established, the billionaire playboy. I also think that his suit, the Iron Man suit, is an offensive weapon, a singular offensive weapon. And again, as Bishop had said, you've got 30 years of time. Now, when Squirrel Girl came out, it was in response to something that was going on, whereas when Iron Man came out, it was very much steeped in the Cold War. When Squirrel Girl came out, you see this response to the ultra gritty and what have you, and so it's going to take longer. It's a dip into something cute, and then let's get back to chewing on sand collectively. And then I think that ultimately, when you look at her first run of her own comic, I don't know if it's her first run, but it's the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, the 58 issues, that goes all the way up through November of 2019. The majority of her run was from 2014 through 2019, essentially. And what that means is that you're seeing her stuff come out at the same time you're seeing hate groups on the massive rise. According to the FBI, they'd gone from 5,400 to 7,300 in America. And I think that those two things are paired pretty strongly together in terms of why we don't see people, and also at the same time the MCU is just chugging along with this, and I love the MCU, but it's battle
Skybeam.
Yeah, and I love it, but Squirrel Girl, she doesn't do that. She's a puzzle solver. Like, she literally finds employment for Hippo Man. And I have long said, there was a gal that I dated a long time ago who said, Batman could totally beat up Captain America. And instead of breaking it off right there, I said, well, you're right, because Captain America is in favor of liberty and Batman's in favor of order. And violence is always more exciting as a comic book. Captain America's comic was never exciting to me, and he's one of my favorite characters, again, in the top 5, because he would take a knee and apologize to the Raven instead of fight all through Manhattan to defend, America, because he's like, oh yeah, you're right, we're sorry. And Squirrel Girl would do the same kind of thing. And I don't think that makes for an exciting comic book for a large segment of comic book consumers. However, as we've seen the media landscape fracture, as we've seen the wider the net, the more people's money you can bring in, because people make comic books to make money. As we've seen, more kids who come to the fore who are like, yeah, I kind of do like the sensitivity of Squirrel Girl. I don't think you'll ever see her featured in the same way that we saw Iron Man featured, though, because alcoholism, self-destructive behavior, and mega violence is so much more exciting to read about and watch about than taking a human hippo bank robber down to the employment office and finding him a job working for a demolition crew. Like, that's niche. That's it's unfortunate that that's niche. That's niche.
I
Yeah.
want to piggyback on what you said there.
Mhm.
And I don't remember the author's name, but there's a famous quote about, why is literature always so depressing? And his response was, every happy family is identical, but every unhappy family is uniquely unhappy.
Mm.
And
a Russian author, I can't remember his name. Was it
Tolstoy, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Was
I
it
think
Tolstoy?
yeah. I wanted to say Tolstoy, but I was like, you know what? I don't feel confident about
Too
that. And I
cliche.
don't want to get caught out. Yeah. But and I think there's something to that in the superhero genre as well, that the happy idealistic characters, everybody wants to say they're people always talk about Superman is just so boring. Well, okay, let's talk about how you could write him.
Mhm.
And what is it that makes him boring? It's, well, he's a Boy Scout. Like you said, Captain America is one of your favorite characters. One of, we've talked about it, one of mine as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's not the same level of like, oh man, what's he gonna do next kind of
Right.
draw. And I think that's yeah, I think that is maybe not a weakness, but that is
I
a
think
psychological hurdle
yeah.
that writers for positive characters like Squirrel Girl are always going to kind of run into.
I
See,
also go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a writer, I actually think that the stories aren't boring because they're Boy Scouts. The stories are boring because the writers don't know how to write them. Because the reason that Superman, when people think of Superman as boring, it's because Superman can beat anybody. They think, well, that's boring. Well, yeah, if the entire central focus of your story is going to be a fist fight, then yes, it's going to be freaking boring.
Mhm.
But Superman also is a regular human being who has depth and complexity and characteristics to him. If you write a story that focuses in and around that, then you're going to have something that's more interesting and intriguing, which I think that's why I think the CW has done well with some of their superhero shows, because like Supergirl is an example, Lois and Superman and Lois, that it's not all about punching somebody in the face to win the day. It's depth, and it's emotions, and it's moral quandaries, and how are you going to function in the world. And I think to me, that's Squirrel Girl fits right into that niche, that it's the same idea that if you can focus on that aspect of a character, people will read it and will gobble it up if it's out there. But I think we're too steeped in the stereotype and the idea that if it's a comic book, it's got to be the bam, biff, pow, zop,
Right.
that type of thing.
Well, and
I
you
think
go.
I was just going to say, I think we need to break away from that. And I think that's what people get hung up on when they think, oh, well, I don't like Squirrel Girl because she's boring. It's Superman's a Boy Scout and Captain America's a Boy Scout. It's like, no, you're looking at this much of a story when it can be this.
And
Jenny, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that they've kind of covered a lot of the ground, but it is, to me, she's fascinating less because of the superhero stuff, although that's fun, but because of the quality of her character and her friendships and the way that she approaches challenging situations. And the way that this idea of the intellect, and the way that she finds unusual ways to solve problems, and violence is the last resort. And she really, really doesn't hardly ever have to engage in sort of fistfights with anyone. But it is about how she and her friends work together to solve the problems. And that to me is fascinating, but that might not be fascinating to everybody. So,
okay. Damian, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that Squirrel Girl at her inception was also different than most of the other superheroes that we've seen. The superheroes that we've seen previously were started out as superheroes in and of themselves. She was clearly a response to what was going on. And I think anytime that you are bouncing off of the trope codifier, you are, there you go, Ed, you are doing something different, and that's not going to hit as well with everybody. There's going to be people who are like, this is my darling, how dare you critique it with this not clad in the spandex sock, normal sized person whose hair is short and who doesn't pose with her arms just so. How dare you do that? And so you're gonna automatically have a segment of the population who, despite the fact that she has all the pouches that Leafield could want a character to have, doesn't
No,
answer.
Leafield would want more. Leafield would always want more.
But I do love the thumb in the eye, or the paw in the eye that they're giving to Leafield by giving her a bunch of pouches.
Yeah.
And she actually uses them for snacks.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that is a response, I think that's ultimately always going to keep it a little more niche. And I kind of don't mind having a secret playground away from the alpha boys who just want to, spin the merry-go-round so fast that you can't jump off. So at the end of the day, I don't mind it being niche, because it's something my kids and I can enjoy without the toxic folk coming in, because we can just shut our window.
Well, when I started reading comic books, it was in the age of the Comics Code Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the standard demographic for the customer base was considered to be the 11 to 14-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of wonder if maybe that has in some ways carried over, in that many of the people now in management were those 11 to 14-year-old boys. And so maybe and this is purely speculation on my part, I don't know any of these people, I haven't talked to them, but maybe there's a subconscious mindset of, this is what sells because this is what sold to me, and therefore we should stick with that. But Jenny, you said you had given this to friends who have daughters.
Mm-hmm.
What age group would you all say this book is appropriate for? Because the thing about the Comics Code Authority is it was age appropriate for everybody, the books.
Right.
And there were a number of books when my son came along, I was like, yeah, no, because they just weren't child friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So Jenny, if you'll start, what age group do you all think?
I think the youngest was like 7 or so when I handed over. Her older sister was like 9. And then I've got another friend whose daughter was like in that 7, 8, 9 period as well. And, anytime I hand over comics, I give them to the parents and say, take a look at this and then see, because we don't have kids. So I don't want to accidentally hand something over that is inappropriate, but they gave them to their kids, and sort of that 7, 8, 9, they really loved it. And it was, the one is still very much into comic books now. That's sort of her primary thing that she's reading. And, but it also kind of helped an awful lot, I think, with, as they were developing sort of literacy and sort of learning to read and all of that other kind of stuff. Because there were words in there that I know that they had to go look up, like some of the things that they didn't understand, what some of the computer science terms were and some of those other things, but it led to those larger conversations with their parents about, well, what's this? And what does a person who does, what did they do? But I think it's, at least for thinking back about when I was a little girl, that's kind of sort of that sweet spot of, as you're negotiating friendships, and sometimes friendships change, and, sometimes, somebody that you played with at recess yesterday is being cranky and doesn't want to be your friend today. I think that the Squirrel Girl stuff kind of helps work through all of that, because it shows all of these different approaches to how you maintain friendships and how you work with a friend that maybe's having a bad day. And so that, like I said, that 7, 8, 9 range is kind of where I've been handing them out.
Okay, Damian?
I taught an after-school class on comic book once, and I teach high schoolers. I think 7, 8, 9 is absolutely awesome. As soon as someone's literate, I think Squirrel Girl is appropriate. But I think in many ways, who needs it more might be my teenagers that I teach.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and
it goes everywhere.
It really does. I think I don't think that there's an age where it's not appropriate. I think that you can cast such a wide net with her, because you do, have her beating Thanos. You can have the 11 to 14-year-olds who are now in 60-year-old bodies. You can have them enjoy the fight, and get a laugh out of it. And then they'll put it down and go back to reading whatever, gritty comic they want to read. So I do think that it's one of the most broad-based. It's almost like it's inverting what the CCA was trying to do, And I love a good subversion. I really do. So which is another reason I love her. But I do think, yeah, pretty much any age. I also think that the multimedia aspect of comic books, my kids were introduced to Squirrel Girl via a video game. There was a Contest of Champions.
Oh, yes.
And they saw how excited I was at Squirrel Girl. So they got excited at Squirrel Girl. And then I switched over to the I forget what it's called now. Oh, Strike Force. And they saw how excited I was about Squirrel Girl there. And they got excited about me having Squirrel Girl, you know, because you can attack people with an army of squirrels in both games. So I think the multimedia aspect really helps because now kids have devices as well and what have you. And I think it is every age, but as soon as they're literate, you should be putting that in their hands.
Okay. Ed, Bishop, do you want to add anything?
I can only concur with the two of them. I think she's an appropriate character, and the stories they tell with her are appropriate and important for kids at every level, up to overannuated kids like, you know, us here. Yeah. So yeah, I have nothing else to add. But yeah.
And I think I think different age groups, that there's something in there for every age group. I think it's more than it's just appropriate for every age group. I think that there's something there. I mean, like, you know, the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl run, I think the artwork itself was a little bit more fun and silly and may lend itself more towards younger kids. Whereas when you get into where, like, you know, she becomes the nanny for Danielle, you know, it's more of a typical Marvel style artwork. But I think that what's in there, you have the friendship aspect, you know, for young kids that are learning to develop relationships. And then you have, you know, learning about how to deal with, you know, with people that are weird or quirky or different, you know, when you start getting into your teenage years, you know, and people that, you know, are mean to you. That doesn't always mean that they're mean people, that there may be something deeper behind that. You know, it really is, it's kind of, it grows with you, right? I mean, there's, every age group will find something new and different out of it as it goes along. It's magic, really.
Well, let's switch gears for a minute, because before the panel started, we were discussing queer coding in Squirrel Girl. And I'm assuming, and I would like the panel to correct me if I'm mistaken, that because it's coded, the younger people that we're talking about probably won't even notice it, but older people will pick up on it. And is that correct? And could you tell the panel, the audience, a little bit about how that works, how the queer coding works in the book? Damian, you brought the subject up, so would you start?
Sure. So I agree with you to a point that it will fly over the young people's heads. However, there are folks who know at a very young age that they are not heteronormative, and they might not have the vocabulary for it. And I think Squirrel Girl helps give them a visual vocabulary for acceptable types of affection, because she holds hands with her friend in public. They're not together, they're roommates. And to us adults, oh, they're roommates like my great aunt Jennifer had a roommate. So that's the queer coding for us, right? But I think for kids, I think it shows them that there are multiple ways to show affection and to show love toward one another. And that helps them to normalize the feelings that they're having when they're perhaps adrift in a world where that's not normalized for them. So I think ultimately, I have a lot to say about this, and it's all ketchup bottling for me. But I think ultimately that Squirrel Girl is queer coded again because of the times that we live in. They have made other queer characters actually queer, but they tend to be mutants. B, they tend to be ancillary characters in third-rate groups or whatnot, like North Star was for Alpha Flight and things like that. Having a character have their own series and having them be queer might be pushing the sensibility of those 11 to 14-year-olds and 65-year-old bodies,
and having them not be a supervillain.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, good point.
Because Mystique is,
yep.
You know,
yep. And you know, and having Deadpool is clearly a queer individual, but he's all over the map on everything. So it just kind of becomes another thing for him.
Yeah.
He's
yeah.
a queer individual in every meaning of the term queer.
Yes.
He's just
so,
yeah.
But I mean, she's very pretty clearly gay coded, but also Disney and Marvel are one entity. And so they put the kibosh on her being actually factually canonically gay. But she does live with Nancy Whitehead, who's her roommate from college. And they do share physical affection. There are panels and panels of long eye contact, which is a very lesbian trope in movies and what have you. And my queer female friends can attest to this. And they co-parent a cat together, and they live out. Yeah. They live out an entire life in one of the storylines. They live out an entire life together. And it's the hug they give to each other at the very end is two old gay women hugging. I mean, it's very clearly that, even though it's under friendship, so it's and what I love about it is the end, like because they have to go back into the past and they fixed it all. So all of this disappears for them. And they said, I don't regret any of it. I don't want to lose it. And I don't want to lose us. And the response is, you're not getting rid of me that easily. And it's beautiful. So
Ed, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, but speaking as a middle school teacher specifically, I think for younger kids, 7, 8, 9, I think there's a good chance that their roommates and they're very good friends. It's just going to be taken at face value. I know that amongst my students, there is a much higher level of awareness, a much higher level of understanding and acceptance of non-heteronormative relationships and non-heteronormative identity. And I think it's a very big generational difference between these kids and when Bishop and I were together in the 7th grade. There was not the recognition that we had classmates who were undoubtedly gay or bisexual.
We had 3 words for being queer back then: gay, lesbian, bisexual.
Yeah.
And now it's so many more, and it's much more fluid.
Well, when we were kids, there was nothing worse than being called gay, right?
Yeah.
That was a horrible pejorative.
Yeah. And now we're in a place where I think kids who are getting on toward puberty are probably going to be more likely to recognize the subtext. And I think it's really important that they see it. Mm-hmm. I think I agree with people who say that, stop making it just subtext, just have it be recognized, because I think that would be much stronger representation. I think that would be a better thing. But, having grown up when I did, I'm just glad that what is there is at least there. Mm-hmm. For the nerdy, not straight kids that I'm teaching, to have somebody they can identify with on that level, showing up and being somebody to be admired. Because I mentioned it a minute ago, but I want to bring it back around to it, is there is a whole trope built around the idea of the deviant or evil queer character. And that has been a trope forever. And I'm really glad to see it getting reversed in this sense, because that's destructive to the identities of these kids. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I think the queer coding is important. I'm as a cishet white guy, I'm really happy to see it. because I want a world where everybody is represented for my own son. I think the world would be a better place for him. So yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Bishop?
yeah, well, and I think, let's be direct here. The subtext isn't there for the kids; it's there for the parents, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It has so much of "won't someone please think of the children." It's never about the children; it's about the parents feeling uncomfortable. The kids rarely ever. Well, kids are always feeling uncomfortable, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what your orientation was. If you had a crush on somebody, it was embarrassing as hell when you were a kid, right? I mean, it just adds a sense of danger and self-loathing if you grew up in a time and a place where it was, bashed upon. But yeah, I think the subtext is it's 100% there for the adults to feel better about themselves, to think they're doing something, and it is an excellent step, and I'm glad that we've taken that first step, and I'm eager for the next step. And I think too that it's the speaking of the parents, I also mean the executives and the people that are in charge, because a lot of the people that are in charge, as much as I might not like to admit it, I'm getting to be in the age group of the people that run these companies. And it's a lot of it is self-fulfilling prophecy, that it's, when Ed and I were growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of interaction with geek girls. We didn't know many girls, if any. I mean, I know you dated a girl for a while that tolerated playing some D&D with us a couple times, but we thought they were mythological, that there were girls out there that liked comic books and role-playing games and all that stuff. And it wasn't because they weren't there. It was because you all were gate-kept out, that you were told that you couldn't have this. It was the same reason there weren't a whole lot of boys that played with dolls, because it just wasn't done. It wasn't right.
And it wasn't just overt gatekeeping. It was also the fact that geek culture didn't realize how I don't want to say hypermasculine, but how very sexist it was. If you go back and look at the rule books that those girls had to look at in order to play those games, the artwork was straight off of a pulp novel cover, and that couldn't have been comfortable.
Chainmail bikinis, right?
Or worse, and didn't bother us at all. But being 12 and 13 years old, we didn't have the empathy to realize, oh yeah, that might be kind of uncomfortable for them, huh?
Yeah, and that's why this character and all that coding, and you're seeing the coding more and more. It's so good because it broadens the audience. It makes the family bigger, right? And that's why I've never understood the whole idea of gatekeeping, that people, it's like, I love this and it's mine and you can't have it, you can't be any part of it. It's like, I love sharing stuff I love with other people. And when I find other people that love the stuff I love them. It's just like, it's the best thing ever. And I don't know how broken you have to be to not want to do that. So yeah, by all means, please, it's can we get over this crap that everybody has to feel like, it's uncomfortable, and it's, oh no, we can't talk about that. We can't talk about sex with kids. We can talk about heterosex because, that's just become normalized and that's just baked into the wallpaper. But, it's a good thing and it's a great first step. But it's just the first step.
Okay, Jenny?
I think one of the wonderful things about this comic, and then also like Lumberjanes and like Paper Girls and all this, they do a really good job, but particularly Squirrel Girl and Lumberjanes, of sort of celebrating human relationships, whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So while it is true that there's absolutely clear coding in here, with the relationship between Doreen and Nancy, you also get a part where Doreen dates Chipmunk, and then they kind of break up, and then he gets a different girlfriend, and then she kind of, sort of resolves into thinking, well, that's all right, after she sort of struggles with that for a little bit, because his girlfriend seems really nice, because again, power of friendship. We also get an awful lot in there, I think, about, does she go on a really bad date with, who was it, Mole Man or something like that?
Oh yeah, Mole Man ended up stalking her for a while.
Stalking her. I mean, you get that, and then you also get sort of this message that, you have choices. You don't have to go on a bad second date. There are ways to turn him down, tell him no, and his bad behavior is his bad behavior, and it's not on her. So I think that these are really kind of powerful messages about celebrating human love and human relationships. Again, whatever that looks like. And, sort of we're back to this whole notion of life's rich tapestry and making sure that everybody feels loved and included, no matter who they are, who they want to date, who they have dated, who they might change their minds about dating in the future. And all of it doesn't matter because it's about, your worth as an individual human being. And that I think is a really powerful message for all readers of the comic.
Does anybody want to add anything to this before we move on?
I would actually like to just address a little bit more of the queer coding. Toward the end of the run, there's a spot where it comes out that Doreen is Squirrel Girl, and they use, do you still want to be friends now that we're out? Do you still want to work with me now that I'm out? It's really thinly veiled there, it's Nancy and Doreen. I think they're twittering back and forth, and I don't remember if it's private or if it's public. But either way, they're having a conversation in written form, digital media that doesn't go away, and kids know that, and don't care as much as we do, because that's been the tapestry of their life. But like straight up, like, do you still want to be my science partner? I think it is, now that I'm out as Squirrel Girl. And of course, I love the fact that Nancy says, you're not getting rid of me that easily, which is just a wonderful recall to their relationship that ended up not happening. But the main creator behind the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Ryan North, he once said, it would be as alien to me to see Nancy and Doreen not in each other's lives as it would be to see Lois and Superman not be in each other's lives. That's a pretty overt pairing, and you could have said Batman and Robin.
Right.
Although it would be far less deadly for Nancy to have this other pairing. But
that just depends on which Robin. Come on, only one of them.
The fact that you had to say which Robin?
They only blew up. Well, okay, granted, but they only blew up one.
True.
I mean,
they fridged the Robin. But
one time,
yeah,
you won't let go of it.
Terrible time.
Yeah.
But I think that admission on his part is, I don't need to prove that it's queer coded or anything like that, but I think that admission on his part is also really, really good to keep in mind when we're talking about the value of queer coding as well, because I do think, like you said, Bishop, it is a first step, and hopefully it's not a last step. And while I agree with everything that Jenny said about the celebration of human relationships, and I love that you brought up the Mole Man stuff and the friendship breaking up with Chipmunk Hunk, I do think I keep coming back to her relationship with Nancy as being more than just best friends. And I think that that's a wonderful thing for kids to see. And I'm okay with it being queer coded, because there are other examples of relationships that are not heteronormative, that are queer relationships. And here's another step in that gradation, which they allow. I mean, they have essentially an open relationship. So you can add polyamory into that a bit. You can add the understanding of there are different seasons in our lives and things like that. So I think the relationship is one of my favorite ones in all of comics, because it's inherently non-toxic and
anti-toxic.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that, North himself was like, oh yeah, they're just like Supes and Lois. And it's like, so thank you for indulging that.
Anybody else? Well, then let's, as a wind up, let's go around, and if each of you will tell us briefly what your favorite Squirrel Girl story is and why. Ed, I think we're back to starting with you.
Okay. Well, it's been referenced once already, and it's not even really a Squirrel Girl story. It's an appearance in another comic. I want to say it was in Great Lakes Avengers, as a matter of fact. The GLA are in the middle of some fight where they're hopelessly, well, they're not quite hopelessly outmatched, but they're having to work really hard against a B or C level villain group, and one of them says, I wonder what Squirrel Girl would say if she was here. And they cut away to a splash panel on the moon of Squirrel Girl standing over the comatose body of Galactus. And she's got one foot like on his belt buckle, if I remember right. And Uatu the Watcher has this big long, there's this huge text box where Uatu says, yes, Squirrel Girl, you have defeated Galactus, and it is not a clone or a life decoy or any other kind of duplicate. It is the one true Galactus. I, Uatu the Watcher,
Thanos.
say it.
Thanos, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Thanos.
But it is, this is the real one. You have beaten him. You are in fact that powerful. and she's standing there with kind of this like, oh well, hey, that's neat kind of look on her face. and it was, again, because for me it was her being such a breath of fresh air from just how toxic comics had gotten at that point. And it was so very clearly a thumb in the eye of the portion of the fan community that was like, she's not really a superhero. That's not how that really works. I was like, no. Uatu the Watcher said it. This is canon now.
Yep.
So and so that would be my favorite Squirrel Girl moment, I'll say.
Okay, Bishop.
Mine actually, I think was from the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl's first run when she ran into Craven, and that she beat him by suggesting that he go hunt. God, I'm drawing a blank now on the undersea creature. Gosh,
Loch Ness Monster?
No,
It was a Kraken, wasn't it?
yeah, Giganto.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for whom she later apologizes when it comes back and says, hey, why'd you send Craven after him? And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was going to cause a problem. My bad. So, I mean, it just like added to itself. But the fact that she was like, going to get into a fight. And then she was like, well, wait a second. You're just looking to hunt things. Well, why don't there's like big creatures like underground and undersea. Why don't you go check them out? So it was like, you were expecting this great big fight with this well-known villain, and she was like, well, no, we don't need to fight. I mean, just don't go after my squirrels, man. That's not cool. Let's go after these other creatures. That is still my favorite. I think it's because it was my first full story introduction to her, but it's also just because that is so prime. I mean, that is undiluted Squirrel Girl right there.
Okay, Jenny.
Oh, I have a handful. Pretty much any interaction she has with Craven the Hunter is delightful. There's one where they go to an escape room. That one's a lot of fun. There's Squirrel Girl beats up the Marvel Universe. That is just a joy. And I'm really quite partial to the Great Lakes Avengers, 1 through 4, which, because we get sort of all of these like little little panels with Monkey Joe in them, sort of commenting on the text, and then Monkey Joe dies, and then we get the Tippy Toe, who is her new sidekick, arrives. So anything that involves sort of the origin story of Tippy Toe, I'm there for. So.
Okay, Damian.
I've got a couple. I've got the hug that she and Nancy share. I mean, it teared me up as I was talking about it. The other one, though, I absolutely adore, and it's her attitude toward the whole thing. She's auditioning to be the babysitter for baby Danielle. And if you know Luke Cage, he will not trust anybody. He trusts her with his and Jessica Jones's daughter during, I believe it's the Secret Invasion. And for her to do that, again, she has to beat Wolverine, essentially. And the part that I love the most about all of that is she knocks Wolverine down, which means she's really good at melee fighting. She knocks Wolverine down and she turns around and says, yeah, GLA represent. And the Great Lakes Avengers are so fun. And she contemplated quitting them. I think that was the reason she quit them, because she's like, oh, I'm getting too much of the press and that's hurting their feelings. And so she still stays true to her roots about being a Great Lakes Avenger, which is the whole thing is such a subversion. And I love that about it. So you've got her joy, her claiming GLA for life, and the fact that Luke Cage trusts her with his daughter, and the fact that it's the army of squirrels. You know, the power of friendship. I will beat you, Wolverine. And he's like, okay, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming up on time. Is there anything anybody wants to add before we close out?
I'll just say on their behalf that the episode on Geek History of Time they do on Squirrel Girl is fantastic. I highly recommend checking it out. Is it 122?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, episode 122. Definitely check it out if you like Squirrel Girl. It is a great episode.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I think I encourage everybody to go read Squirrel Girl comics. It's not just a good comic, it's a good comic. It does in our era what comics in the 60s used to do, but does it way better. It's subversive, it's representative, and it's a good kind of different from what came before.
Well, then I guess that concludes things. Before we wind up, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to tell us where we can find more information about their work and if there's anything they're working on now that they'd like to highlight. Jenny, will you start?
All right. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you again. This is, always a good time to talk about Squirrel Girl. I can be found on Twitter at Jennifer Swartz-2. I also am going to be, you can find me on a couple of other podcasts. Nancy was kind enough to invite me for the Barbara Gordon ConTinual Con a couple of weeks ago, so that's posting soon. I'm also going to be on an upcoming episode of the over on the Fire and Water Podcast Network, the Justice League International Blah Ha Ha podcast, and then also the For All Mankind, the Super Friends podcast. So those will be posting soon. And like I said, I'm on Twitter at Jennifer Swartz-2. You can find me on Facebook at Jenny Swartz-Levine, and my email can be found at lec.edu, which is Lake Erie College, and people can shoot me an email. I'm the only Swartz-Levine in the directory. So,
okay, Damian.
Yeah, you can find myself and Ed on A Geek History of Time. It's available on the Apple and Stitcher podcast providers. A Geek History of Time. We also have a website, Geek History Time. You can also find me on Twitter and Insta if you're curious at Duh Harmony, 2 H's in the middle. And over on TikTok on Duh Harmony 1. It's almost entirely me doing puns to torture Ed. But you can find us again at Geek History of Time. Our episode 122 is about Squirrel Girl, but we have done a number of podcasts about comic books. Both of us take turns teaching the other one about a thing. I still to this day think one of my proudest podcasts is the one where Ed taught me about J.R.R. Tolkien. And I stand that very hard. Our podcast is over 150 episodes, and it is quite a buffet. So if you don't like asparagus, that's okay. There's green beans. You don't like crab, that's fine. We have soft serve. So dig in, find stuff that you like, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay, Ed.
Yeah, well, I just want to open this by saying, Damian, I love how you say it's almost entirely you torturing me with puns. It's not almost, it is. I can be found also as the other half of A Geek History of Time. And I am sporadically on Twitter at Ed Blaylock. And I am even more sporadically on TikTok as Mr_Blaylock, Blaylock. And on there, most of the time, you're going to find me either being a teachers union thug or engaging in ranting about Star Wars topics. So that's me.
Bishop.
You can find me on Twitter at Bishop M. O'Connell. Probably the best place to find me is my blog, aquietpint.com. I am not as frequent on Twitter nowadays as I have been. I also have an author page on Facebook under Bishop O'Connell. Just look for the one that isn't the high school. And I have at the end of May a new novel coming out that is a historical fiction / weird Western called The Two-Gun Witch, that is set in post-Civil War America with magic revolvers and elves that hunt humans that are corrupted by dark magic.
Okay, and you can find me here on ConTinual. I'm on every Comics Lair panel. My website is nancynorthcott.com, and you can find out information about my books there and what I'm doing. My primary form of social media is Twitter, where I spend probably more time than is good for me, and I am at Nancy Northcott. I have a Facebook author page, facebook.com/Nancy Northcott author, but I tend to forget I have it. So Twitter is the best place to check, Twitter or my website. And I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for joining us today. It's been great, and I certainly have learned a lot about Squirrel Girl. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find, and the Heroes Convention. For more information about them, you can visit www.heroesonline.com. And thanks to everybody for watching.